Thank you for joining us. On November the 3rd, 2017, the historic Balfour Declaration, Centennial, was celebrated 100 years after the British government declared support for the establishment of a Jewish home in Palestine. The Prime Ministers of Britain and Israel made the following statements at the Centennial on November 3rd, 2017.
Lord Rothschild, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Chief Rabbi, distinguished guests, lords, ladies and gentlemen, I am so pleased to be here with you tonight and to be with you, Lord Balfour, on this special evening as we mark the centenary of the letter written by your great uncle, which I believe to be one of the most significant letters in history. A letter which gave birth to a most extraordinary country, and a letter which finally opened the door to helping make a Jewish homeland a reality. It was a letter that is all the more remarkable when you consider its length, its context, and its sensitivity. First, it was exceptionally concise, with, as Lord Rothschild has said, just 67 words. In my experience, such brevity is not typically a feature of letters from the Foreign Office. But second, we should consider the context in which this letter was written. Let us cast our minds back to the time of 1917, in an era of competing imperial powers, and with Britain still embroiled in the midst of the First World War. The idea of establishing a homeland for the Jewish people would have seemed a distant dream for many and been fiercely opposed by others. Yet it was at this very moment that Lord Balfour had the vision and the leadership to make this profound statement about restoring a persecuted people to a safe and secure homeland. Some people suggest we should apologize for this letter. I say absolutely not. We are proud of our pioneering role in the creation of the State of Israel. We are proud to stand here today together with Prime Minister Netanyahu and declare our support for Israel. And we are proud of the relationship we have built with Israel. And as we mark 100 years since Balfour, we look forward to taking that relationship even further. As Prime Minister Netanyahu and I discussed in Downing Street earlier today, we want to deepen our links in areas where Israel is leading the world, in areas like agriculture, health, science, technology, and innovation. Israel is the true start-up nation, and we are proud to be your partner. We also remain absolutely committed to Israel's security. For it is only when you witness Israel's vulnerability that you truly understand the constant danger Israelis face. As I saw on my visit in 2014, when the bodies of the murdered teenagers, Naftali Frenkel, Gilad Shaer, and Eyal Lifrach were discovered. So I am clear that we will always support Israel's right to defend itself. And in a world where Britain and Israel increasingly face the same shared challenges and threats, I am just as clear that our security services will continue to deepen their already excellent cooperation to keep all our people safe. So I believe we should gather here tonight with a great deal of pride in all that we have achieved and all that Israel stands for. We must recognize how difficult at times this journey has been, from the Jews forced out of their homes in Arab countries in 1948, to the suffering of Palestinians affected and dislodged by Israel's birth, both completely contrary to the intention of Balfour to safeguard all of these communities. But as we work together towards Balfour's vision of a peaceful coexistence, we must be equally clear that there can never be any excuses for boycotts, divestment, or sanctions. They are unacceptable, and this government will have no truck with those who subscribe to them. Neither can there ever be any excuse for anti-Semitism in any form. Just as there is no excuse for hatred against Muslims, Christians, or anyone based on the peaceful religions they choose to follow, the place of their birth, or the colour of their skin. And yes, this means recognising that there is today a new and pernicious form of anti-Semitism, which uses criticism of the actions of the Israeli government as a despicable justification for questioning the very right of Israel to exist. This is abhorrent, and we will not stand for it. And that is why the United Kingdom has been at the forefront of an international effort to create a new definition of anti-Semitism, which explicitly calls out this inexcusable attempt to justify hatred. So let me be clear. Criticising the actions of Israel is never and can never be an excuse for questioning Israel's right to exist, any more than criticising the actions of Britain could be an excuse for questioning our right to exist. And criticising the government of Israel is never and can never be an excuse for hatred against the Jewish people, any more than criticising the British government would be an excuse for hatred against the British people. Put simply, there can be no excuses for any kind of hatred towards the Jewish people. There never have been, and there never will be. And let me say this too. We will never forget where that hatred and prejudice can lead. That is why it is right that the United Kingdom will have a permanent and fitting national memorial to the Holocaust, standing next to Parliament, together with a learning centre that will teach the lessons of the Holocaust for society today and act as a voice against hatred in the modern world. And I'm delighted that just last week, the cross-party United Kingdom Holocaust Memorial Foundation announced that Sir David Adjaye, Ron Arad, and the landscape architects Gustafsson, Porter and Baumann have won the international design competition for the Memorial and Learning Centre with their evocative concept design for this new national landmark at the heart of our democracy. Now, in saying all of this, I do not underestimate the scale of the challenges we face together. The challenge of fighting hatred in all its forms, the challenge of bringing people together, the challenge of fulfilling Balfour's vision of peaceful coexistence. But neither do I underestimate the scale of the prize that is at stake. I saw a glimpse of that prize just last Saturday when I attended a charity concert with the West Eastern Divan Orchestra on London's South Bank, an orchestra that brings together young Israeli and Palestinian musicians, as well as those from several other Arab countries, to promote coexistence and intercultural dialogue. They were performing together, raising money for the Jacqueline Dupre Tribute Fund, which helps fund multiple sclerosis research. And through their shared love of music, they escaped the divides of their history to come together for a united cause. In their actions and in many others like it, the spirit of Balfour lives on. So let us tonight be inspired by that spirit. Let us recognise the contribution of Balfour in fulfilling what was once little more than a 2,000-year-old dream for a persecuted people. Let us take inspiration from the vision he showed as we work together for that future where Arabs and Jews can live in peaceful coexistence. And as we look to that future, let us mark with pride what has been achieved with the creation of the State of Israel and, in Balfour's own words, a national home for the Jewish people. Thank you.
Pray silence for the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Our gracious host, Lord Rothschild, Lord Balfour. It's unbelievable to have these two names associated here. Prime Minister May, thank you for that extraordinary speech. You said exactly what Martin Luther King said about anti-Semitism masquerading as anti-Zionism, but you said it so clearly, so powerfully. And your denunciation of anti-Semitism rings so true. Thank you. Thank you on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people. Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, a worthy successor of Lord Balfour, as we found today. There are so many friends here from Israel, from Britain, from the United States, ambassadors and ministers, former prime ministers, former secretary of state, friends, clergy, rabbis, and archbishops. This is a momentous occasion. It marks a pivotal event in Jewish history, in British history, in world history. The history of modern Zionism is intertwined with the history of Britain, the actions and words of Britain. But for me, this is a deeply moving personal moment. In the beginning of World War I, one of the Zionist leaders, Vladimir Jabotinsky, approached the British government and asked to form a Jewish fighting force within the British Army. And after some consideration, the British government agreed. They gave them the task of being the Zion Mule Corps, which operated first in Gallipoli. It then became the Jewish Brigade, which sowed the seeds of the Israeli Defense Forces. The commander of that force was Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson, a British officer. Patterson had never met Jews. He was skeptical of what he would get. But in Gallipoli and beyond, from Gallipoli to the Galilee, he was amazed. He was amazed by the sacrifice, the courage, the camaraderie of his soldiers, whom he became deeply affectionate for and prized all his life. Some 20 years later, Patterson met my father in the United States during World War II, and he joined him in advocating for a Jewish state. The partnership and the friendship they forged was so deep that my parents decided to call their first newborn, my older brother, Jonathan, in honor of John Henry Patterson. John for him, Nathan for my grandfather. John Henry Patterson was the godfather of my brother, who was later to fall in Entebbe. And I grew up with a silver cup, with a dedication to my godson, Jonathan, from your godfather, John Henry Patterson. Think about that. The first Jewish fighting force in 2,000 years. And the commander, the British commander, is the godfather of one of the future commanders in the Israeli Air Force, in the Israeli Defense Force. The commander who helped rescue Palestine from 400 years of Turkish oppression was the godfather of the Israeli commando leader who rescued Jews from terrorists in the heart of Africa. Patterson was to die in the United States. And 2 years ago, fulfilling his last wish, his last will and testament, I brought his remains to Israel and buried him just as he requested, next to his beloved Jewish fighters in Israel. So Britain is intertwined with the birth of Zionism. But for me, this connection is deeply, deeply personal. But that connection has its roots right here in London. In this city, in 1900, Theodor Herzl, our modern Moses, the founder of modern Zionism, addressed the Fourth Zionist Congress that he convened here. He said this: England, free and mighty England, whose vision embraces the seven seas, will understand us and our aspirations. It is here that the Zionist movement, I'm sure, will soar to further and greater heights. Herzl's confidence was well-founded. At the time, British sympathy for Zionism was evident everywhere. You could hear it, you could read it actually, in the novels of Walter Scott and George Eliot. You could hear it in the speeches of Lord Ashley and Benjamin Disraeli, and as we just heard, Lord Shaftesbury in the 1830s. You can see it in the expeditions of the Palestine Exploration Fund, which Queen Victoria established to rediscover and map the land of the Bible. Alongside America, it was here in Britain where Christian Zionism preceded modern Jewish Zionism and kindled its fire. This is why Herzl, in whom that fire burnt brightest, believed that Britain would be the place where his sacred mission to establish a Jewish state would be propelled forward. And just as he predicted, 17 years later, on November 2nd, 1917, with the help of a genius diplomat, Chaim Weizmann, and his friend, Lord Rothschild, and others, Britain recognized the right of the Jewish people to a national home in our historic homeland. And while they were later, I'm a diplomat, I'm the foreign minister, Boris, I'll be careful. And while there were later painful retreats on the path to national rebirth, we always remember proud British Zionists like Lord Balfour, Lloyd George, and Winston Churchill, who entered a pantheon reserved for the greatest friends of the Jewish people in our long history. And we remember those perhaps lesser-known men who played a great role in our national revival and who forged pivotal friendships with their Jewish counterparts. Mark Sykes, recognize the family, Mark Sykes with Aaron Aronson, Colonel Richard Meinertzhagen, Allensby's intelligence officer, who was later falsely accused of being of Jewish descent. Actually, he was of Danish origin. Colonel Richard Meinertzhagen with the Neely espionage network that Aronson founded that provided invaluable intelligence for the British Army in the Palestine campaign. And John Henry Patterson with Jabotinsky. So exactly a century later, here in London, I'm privileged to speak as the Prime Minister of the state that Herzl foresaw and that these men fought to create. Without decades of immigration and hard work, without the courage and sacrifice that was needed to defend our lives and our liberty, the State of Israel would not have come into being. But it was the Balfour Declaration that galvanized international support for Zionism as never before and paved the path for Zionism's entry on the world stage. Now, a once stateless and powerless people has found its rightful place among the nations. Prime Minister May, the Balfour Declaration put Britain on the right side of history. In marking that declaration today, you are keeping Britain on the right side of history. On behalf of the government of Israel and the people of Israel, I thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, while we mark with pride the Balfour Declaration today, Palestinian leaders call it a tragedy. But the real tragedy of the Balfour Declaration is that it took 3 decades to fulfill its promise. Too late for 1/3 of the Jewish people who perished in the Holocaust. Had Israel been established in 1928 or 1938 and not in 1948, millions could have been saved. Some people mistakenly believed that there is an Israel because of the Holocaust. In fact, it's only because there was no Israel that the Holocaust could occur, because there was no sovereign Jewish power to protect the Jewish people or to provide refuge for the 6 million murdered by the Nazis. And the other true tragedy of the Balfour Declaration is that the Palestinians rejected it. They still do. They said so this morning. Incredibly, the Palestinians speak of suing the British government for the Balfour Declaration. Any lawyers in this room? This is a sure win for Britain. It's time for the Palestinians to end their quest to eliminate Israel. It's time for them not just to accept a Jewish national home. It's time for them to accept, finally, a Jewish state, a nation state for the Jewish people, because if they do, the conflict will be over in a minute. But there is good news. Alongside Egypt and Jordan, with whom we've already made peace, others in the Arab world are moving forward. They recognize that Israel is not their enemy, but their indispensable ally in fighting militant Islam. They view Israel as their partner for ensuring a peace and a future and security and prosperity. It's time that the Palestinians will embrace this approach too. And if they do, they will find in Israel and in me an enthusiastic partner for building a peaceful and prosperous future for both our peoples. It's within our reach. I think it's getting closer. Now, you doubt it. You don't really believe what I say, but you don't know everything that I know. And I'm not going to reveal it now. Many others around the world already recognize the benefits of peace and security and prosperity by cooperating with Israel. They seek to benefit from our intelligence prowess in fighting terrorism and our innovative technology in building their economies. People are always amazed at that, but you'd think that it would be obvious that if we liberated our economy, which we did, this is what happens. We untethered the genius and enterprise of our people to become a rising power on the world stage. 3 years after Israel's independence, Winston Churchill wrote Israel's President Chaim Weizmann, one of the architects of the Balfour Declaration. He said this: "The wonderful exertions which Israel is making in these times of difficulty are cheering to an old Zionist like myself." I'm sure that this old Zionist Churchill would have been even prouder today of Israel's incredible successes. It's a shining beacon of freedom democracy, and progress in a troubled region, and we might, with this beacon, help dispel this sea of troubles. Prime Minister May, I thank you again for standing for the historical truth and for your unequivocal denunciation of anti-Semitism. I thank Britain for the foresighted declaration of Lord Balfour. I thank Britain for liberating the Holy Land from 400 years of Ottoman domination. And I thank Britain for valiantly standing alone against the Nazi tyranny. For all this, the Jewish people and the Jewish state will be forever grateful. Thank you.
Human age reversal. We may be there already. Human studies are now ready to begin to confirm meaningful reversal of pathological aging processes. These clinical trials aim to alter older humans so that they function as much younger individuals. Even modest success will result in a paradigm shift that will impart enormous societal benefits, such as sparing Medicare from insolvency. Life extension is not standing idle while 5,000 Americans die each day from age-related illnesses. Joining us are physician scientists who want to hurry up these technologies to keep people from aging to death. While life extension is pushing these projects forward, we need financial help to ensure these studies are carried through to fruition.
This concludes our special show for today. I'm Richard Peretz. On behalf of all of us here, thank you for being with us.